For the most basic fans, the first two publishers who come to mind when they think of comic books are Marvel and DC. But there's a whole larger universe out there among independent comic book publishers. Today, I'm joined by Dion Wilson for part one of our conversation about independent comic book publishing and its future. This is Tatooine Sons.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the Porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that Porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody listen to that.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and be endorsed by the writer-director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. Happy birthday, Last Jedi, 4 years ago. Can you believe that? It's been a weird 4 years for Star Wars. Anyway, we believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story, it is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by Dion Wilson. Dion is the creator of TitaniumComics, Rast Technologies and Multiverse. While helming TitaniumComics, Dion oversaw the production, distribution, and retail elements of a unique and exclusive set of comic book characters and stories. The company was actually featured in several comic media articles and partnered on innovative technology projects with Ascribe and Leah Moore's Electricomics platform. Dion is passionate about providing a platform for independent comic book publishers to compete with the big properties in the space. And even a few minutes after meeting Dion, it is obvious that he is a huge comic book fan. And I asked why he loves comic books so much.
Wow. Well, comics were here in my family before I got here. And I know they've been around for everybody for a long time. But I love them because they really allow you to go somewhere you really haven't been. They allow you to become someone you probably not going to be able to be, and really think about potential. So I love comics because they just really take you away from the norm. And I suppose that's the common idea around most, fantasy entertainment. But for me, they really transport me to worlds and have transported me to worlds that, if I had a choice, I would be in those worlds for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. What's the first time you knew you were a comic book fan?
The first time I realized I was a comic book fan, I would have to say when I started creating them. And this was actually not 15 or 16 when I got a lot better at it. This was at I think 7, 8 years old, trying to take pieces of paper, fold them in half, staple them, do almost like a saddle stitch and, draw, even put a sticker on there for the price. Those were the earliest days, where I was trying to tell stories, even with the limited knowledge I had, and even with the limited illustration talent I had. I tried to do best I could, but those were the points. And I think when it hit me later, when I really realized, wow, I'm getting more into the story than the art, that was in the 80s, during, for Marvel, this was during Inferno, X-Men, and for DC, It was Batman. I think it's Batman's New Adventures. I don't remember the actual issue numbers. I should. I haven't written down, but those were two really pivotal points where I said, "Whoa, I'm getting into the stories, not just captivated by the illustration." So,
what was it about those stories that captivated you, that grabbed you, that pulled you in?
I realized how complex the characters were compared to even what was shown in the animation, in a lot of the TV cartoons. As I really, for instance, this particular issue of Batman, it was a new Robin, and Dick Grayson had become Nightwing, and he, showed back up on the scene to help out Batman and the new Robin with, I can't remember who the villain was, but whoever, go up against the villain. And there was this detail in the story that was very realistic. This idea of family, this idea of, being let down, and even coming together in, adverse circumstances to take care of their business regardless, to the bad feelings or to the changes that have been made. And I felt a connection to that. I could really relate that to my life and the lives of other people around me. And for the X-Men, a little bit different. It's more of a fantasy thing, but I would have to say it was more about how complex a story, how they could take fantasy and really go deep with it. This is, of course, post Chris Claremont, but it was still I would say, on track and on point for the X-Men. So, just the complexity of the story, the fantasy for Marvel. For DC, it was very realistic for me. It's very realistic, minus the cape and cowl.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things. We talk about on our show. Every episode opens with the statement that we believe that pop culture, be it comic books, TV, video games, movies, all of that, is the mythology of this generation. That there's a story that when we connect with these stories, that they actually speak to something within us, and that's why we are gravitating towards those. What how has comic books spoken to that story that's kind of written on your own soul over the years?
That's to say that's a good question. Excuse me. It really is. I would say that, again, I go back to potentiality, right? In school, I was great with math and science, and the characters I grew up with were great in math and science. And within math and science are just boundless potential. And it continues to resonate with me today because the mankind has such a great potential for where we can go and what we can do. I also see it as a means of people who would not otherwise come together, have a common bond, and not just have a common bond there, but again, take that potential within the bond between the uniqueness of the people involved and do something really great. So those things always seem to reverberate in my heart, in my mind, whether it's a comic movie, a comic book, or an animated show.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How did you become involved in the business of comic books versus just being a comic books lover?
Okay. Excuse me. Business for comics for me was about business in general. So I went on a high school field trip to one of the local banks, and they had an entire high rise in our downtown area. And our field trip actually started with some of the top floors. So we were on one of the top floors, and just a gorgeous viewpoint over the city, over the bay. And in that room, I recognized that, and I didn't really understand it. I mean, this is high school. I probably should have, but I didn't really understand it. But I knew that, people were doing very serious transactions in a place like that. And whatever it was they were doing, I wanted to do it too. It's like I kind of felt the power of the room. It was just a conference room, but it was just something about it. I could visualize people sitting at those tables, at that table, and making things happen, making things work, being the reason that we were in the building we were in, that, being invited to it, that the bank was, downstairs. And that forever changed me. I could not go back to simply wanting to illustrate. And that's really what my background has been. It's been in illustration since I was, a wee lad. So I am, the idea evolved for me. So it started with, hey, I'm gonna illustrate, and I'm gonna go work for Marvel. To, now that I've been bit by the business bug, I'm gonna work for myself. I'm going to do comics. I'm going to create my own studio. I'm going to do it for myself. I still have one of my old business cards from high school for my studio. And then I transitioned away from comics to really boomerang back to it years later. And I think that the boomerang was really, really nice in that I was able to get a bit more knowledge in investing and business, just as a common practice from nonprofit organizations, Fortune 500 companies, and then come back to my first love, but come back to it with a knowledge that I could really do a lot more in the space, not just create comics, but be a decider on where those comics go, who put them together, and, what impact they can really have, business-wise. So, that year in high school, and please don't don't ask me which year, but that particular year, it was one that just awakened me to the possibilities of when you do a business, any product, any widget, any service is ultimately, the business is the vehicle for that. So that product, that service, that widget is going to be delivered to the customer. It's going to be delivered to the market based on what that business is like, what that model is like. And I fell in love with that. I really fell in love with the idea of teams. I mean, again, when I talk about X-Men and, we say the Bat Family or some of the other teams that are out there, even though I did a lot of solo stuff, I was really into teams, that dynamic of different people from different backgrounds, putting their experiences together, putting their skills together for a common goal or common good. And, going through the motions, dealing with whatever the obstacles are, but at the end, wherever that end is, getting the results they wanted. And being even more bonded from that experience than just the reason they got together. And so I saw, again, like I said earlier, I saw the realism in that. I could connect with that. And so that really brought me to saying, hey, let's go into business, and then let's make the comic book a result of that business, a result of the team's efforts, a result of our goals and intentions, the collaboration.
As this episode is releasing, we're getting ready to watch Spider-Man No Way Home for the very first time. And while we haven't seen it yet, we are hoping that it includes a major team-up event with multiple versions of Spider-Man working together to defeat an overwhelming enemy. And while we love stories and content that's being put out by Marvel and DC, I do think it's appropriate that the independent comic book publishing world is teaming up like the Avengers. I guess that makes Dion like the Nick Fury of that universe. My interview with Dion will continue in just a moment, but I want to take just a minute to thank our sponsor, Cufflinks.com. This past Monday evening, Sam and Nate and I had the wild experience of hanging with the crazies at the LA red carpet premiere of Spider-Man No Way Home. And one of the coolest moments was when Doctor Strange himself, Benedict Cumberbatch, ran away from his security to greet fans and ended up where we were standing. Now, I'm not saying he stopped right in front of us and greeted the fans directly, like pointing at us and stuff, because the three of us were wearing gorgeous Spider-Man cufflinks and ties and socks from Cufflinks.com. I'm just not saying it wasn't the reason either. If you're not familiar with Cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items, including cufflinks and ties and tie bars and socks from all of the fandoms that you love, like Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel and DC and Lord of the Rings and everything that you can think of. We love Cufflinks.com because they are family owned and they're run by a couple of brothers who geek out about Star Wars and Marvel and comic books as much as we do. So if you want to help this show out and you want to look great doing it, then head on over to Cufflinks.com. Take a look at everything it has to offer and be sure to use the code Tatooine15 at checkout to receive 15% off your entire order. Yeah, I wonder what comic book character cufflinks Dion would want to wear. I'll have to ask him sometime. As we continue our interview together, I asked Dion why he's so passionate about independent comic book publishing. Here's his answer.
My passion for independence, number one, I started as one. But number two, the sheer value, social and financial value that's there. We're talking about well over 200,000 people globally dedicated to comics. We're talking about at least 10,000 groups of independent creators creating collectively more intellectual property than even the largest two, commercially successful brands that are out there. And they're doing this every year as individuals and then also collectively. We're talking about a group that is really the underdog. And I seem to have a really soft spot for the underdogs. And, there's just too many stories where the Davids beat the Goliaths, and this group is, it's time for it to be seen. It's time for it to meet the challenges of the industry and to, move forward in a way that shows the value that's really been there since National and Timely Comics, the late 1930s. These guys and girls that are creating comics have a tremendous value in this space. Everything from, in today's world, telling a story through the lenses of the medical profession, comics that are for health, to comics that are instructional and comics that focus on other areas besides the superheroes and superheroines. So I'm in love with indie creators. There's so much culture there. Recently, in fact, this was just Friday, I had the opportunity to speak with a group from the Caribbean, from Barbados. And their whole focus, which this idea totally blew my mind, their whole focus is to use the comic as a means of wealth transfer. I said, whoa, this is blowing my mind. You know, when we think of wealth transfer, and if, you know, for the layman, if we can get past the idea of a Rolls Royce and a $20 million house, we think of wealth transfer, obviously, we're thinking about the work of our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers, and the results of that as well coming to us or the generations after. But the knowledge base of wealth transfer is, you know, I don't know the percentage, but it's huge. More than the things that can be passed on, the knowledge base of what our forefathers discovered, experienced, and are able to teach us, you know, even when they're not here, just from what's been journaled, if you know, you're fortunate to have a journal. And these individuals in the Caribbean whose stories and voices are yet to be heard on the global stage of comics, they're thinking that way. I mean, I'm not even thinking that way. And I'm in the Western world where, you know, it's easy for a comic book, essentially for comics to become mainstream. But they're thinking about teaching the diaspora, you know, those that have come from Africa, that have transitioned into Western Europe, the United States and North America, as well as into the Caribbean, teaching them and also educating them about their uniqueness in the world, and doing it through the comic book, and doing it in such a way where it's not just telling the story to today's audience and today's consumer, but telling the stories and, you know, kind of making them, etching them in stone, if you will, for the next generation and the generation after that. Unthought of, you know, excuse me, just an amazing proposition. And I think, you know, that is indicative of most, if not all, of the indie creators that are out there are unique brand propositions, stories, and characters that, because of the success and the, you know, the push forward that Marvel and DC and the Image, Dark Horse, Valiant, you know, we got to throw Valiant in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, yeah, the push that they've made, our creators are inspired by that. A lot of those creators will never write, illustrate, ink, or letter for those companies. The competition is fierce. You know, it's only so many, you know, so many positions to go around. But they're doing it on their own terms. And it's giving them the opportunity to do a bit more than they would if they, you know, got those positions, if you will. So it's forcing them to be a little bit more creative, to add more of what they're thinking and what they're feeling into that product space. And we're just going to see some amazing products come from the space. They already exist, but they're going to be a lot more. And so that's what excites me. It excites me that there's the largest possible group with so much to offer, so much value there.
It's interesting because you're talking about this group from the Caribbean that sees comic books as a tool for wealth transfer, and that how that is not exclusively tied to monetary concerns. It's as much about heritage and history and legacy and experience, and passing that on not just to the people looking at it immediately in this generation, but beyond that. And it reminds me of the way that humanity has passed on their legacies for thousands of years. You know, this goes all the way back to cave drawings, back in the ancient period, and how as you know, the people that listen to our show, they know that one of my passions is understanding sort of the ancient Near East and the culture of that, and the stories of that, and how even something that the phenomenon of the logic, reason, rational, give me 3 points, bullet points that I can communicate facts through, is really a very modern approach towards education, towards communication, and those types of things. For thousands of years, the most impactful way to communicate big truths and big histories is through stories. And so what I hear you saying is that the independent creators, they are understanding that to some extent. They have the power to be able to do that because they are independent. They're probably freer. Would you agree with me on this? They're more free to tell stories that way than if they are attached to like a Marvel or a DC or a Valiant? Not because those companies are inherently just greedy corporate things. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is that they've got a box that they have to keep things in because that's what they've built for themselves. But independent creators have more freedom. Is that kind of what you're saying with that?
Oh, no, I absolutely agree with you. Right. This is not about saying that the larger companies are villains or monsters.
Right.
But like you said, they've got boxes that they need to check, and they've created their process of efficiency, knowing how long it takes to get that story out. And then their characters that they're dealing with are characters they've had for how many years, right? 50, 60 years. There's so much built up in and around those characters that telling more stories sometimes might convolute it. And, that's something that DC understands very well and has moved past to a larger degree. So yes, these creators have the space and time to do so. I absolutely agree with it.
The bigger something grows and the more popular it becomes, the more challenging it is for that thing to change or experiment. And expectations can too easily force these stories into very specific boxes. And that's one of the reasons that independent comic book publishing is so innovative, and why for decades, many of the best stories in comic books have come from that space. So Dion and I were having so much fun chatting. We continued for a lot longer. So we're going to continue the conversation next week as we discuss the ways that independent comic book creators are actually using Web 3.0 to grow their companies while continuing to tell these amazing and unique stories. Make sure you tune in again next Friday for that. And thank you so much for listening to Tatooine Sons of Pop Culture Podcast. If you enjoyed this interview, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your podcast app of choice. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on your app so you get every episode the moment that it drops. Our next episode releases on Tuesday, and we've got a lot to talk about, including our reaction to Spider-Man No Way Home, and of course that amazing revelation in episode 5 of Hawkeye. And then we have to at least some point talk about our trip to LA where we visited like Stark Industries and we ate shawarma with the Avengers. Kind of. Anyway, tune in. You'll find out what I'm talking about. Make sure you follow Tatooine Sons on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Share this episode with somebody else. It is the best way to help this show grow. And I think that's going to do it for this week. There's only one thing left to say.
May the Force be with you, always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Join, please.